Well, after the hottest summer on record in the Northern Hemisphere, new data shows we also had the hottest September ever too. It was 0.5 degrees Celsius warmer than the previous record, which was set in 2020. But is this really something we should be worrying about? Well, joining me right now is Ralph Schoellhammer. He's an economist and political theorist in Austria. Good afternoon to you, Ralph.
Julia, great to be back on. I'm a little intimidated.
I was going to say to you, you're back by popular demand because the audience reaction last time you were on was, get that man on every week. And I'm going to do my best to do that. Ralph, great to talk to you. Warmest September on record after the second warmest now, is from 2020. First of all, can we trust that data, and does it matter?
Well, the way in which the measurements have been changed in the past makes me a little bit suspicious, but I would say this. Whether it's true or not, and I'm inclined to believe it is true, it doesn't matter for a very simple reason. And let me put it this way. The world is rolling the dice on climate change. We are running the experiment for the simple fact most of the emissions in the future will come from the developing world, and the developing world will not stop developing because the West tells them to. And even equally important is, you must not forget, it's not just their population size, it's urbanization that matters. And these parts of the world will continue to urbanize, which, by the way, puts a very interesting wrinkle into the whole migration debate, because what many people underestimate is, for example, if somebody moves from India to Great Britain, their energy use immediately grows by a factor of 4. Somebody from Afghanistan by a factor of 35. So if the British environmentalists really want to, make their carbon footprint smaller, they should move into the Afghan countryside, because then they would reduce it by a factor of 35.
Because it is no doubt the case, that we've seen Britain, like other European nations and many other advanced nations around the world, have been reducing their carbon emissions, moving some just to cleaner fuels largely. That's been the main thing. Moving away from coal has been the really big game changer more than anything else. Meanwhile, you say developing world, and we include India, the most populous nation in the world now, China just behind them, huge countries, huge populations, and they are using fossil fuels like there's no tomorrow. We've seen in China the growing use of coal. They've been building massive big railways to carry coal, and it's quite bizarre that so many people who sort of are getting hysterical about whether or not we reach net zero by 2050 or 2051 in this country, completely ignoring what huge swathes of the world are doing, and what they're doing is climbing out of poverty.
Yeah, and this is the key. So the adaptation will be the one strategy that's going to be left, because there is this idea, which is entirely false, that, for example, developing countries can simply leapfrog development. So they move from burning wood and dung to solar and windmills. This is not how this works. In order to build cities, in order to urbanize, you need asphalt, you need steel, you need concrete, you need all the things that we already used to build our infrastructure in the past. They need it now to build it now. And by the way, we would also need it to kind of maintain and to rebuild the infrastructure that has been crumbling over the years, both in Britain and continental Europe. So this is an issue both for them and for us, which is why I heard Rishi Sunak say we stick to our goals of net zero by 2050. Unless you want to sacrifice a significant part of the wealth of the British people and others, it's not going to happen. Yeah. I'm very sorry to say this. It's impossible.
But that's the key thing, isn't it? We spoke to an activist from Just Stop Oil yesterday, and very lively it was too, Ralph. And she was saying that we have to stop using fossil fuels in 7 or 8 years. So basically, 2030, we need to stop using all fossil fuels. I mean, there seem to be some out for some absolutely vital uses, but most people who discuss this, and I'm amazed to say, most people who claim to be experts on this and care desperately about this, and politicians who vote in Parliament on these issues, frankly, don't have a clue what they're talking about in terms of what we need fossil fuels for. Can you, for the benefit of our audience, who are far more better informed than most of these people, can you explain yet again, just how reliant we are right now on fossil fuels and how reliant we will be on fossil fuels for the future?
Well, as we know, right, 82% of the world's primary energy comes from fossil fuels. And let me tell you another story real quick. If you look at the correlation between life expectancy and energy use, it's almost a perfect correlation. Energy is life. period. If people have access to energy, everything gets better. So I heard the interview you had with the activist yesterday. So when they say that the use of fossil fuels is killing people, that is partially correct. There are no solutions in politics, only trade-offs. Everything has a downside. But overall, access to energy, coal, gas, nuclear, oil particularly, has been to the benefit of the human race. The numbers there are absolutely conclusive. There is no doubt about it. And the other thing is, we are a little bit being gaslighted here. I give you one example. Worldwide electricity, 3% comes from oil. So even if we switch to wind and solar, it's only going to replace 3% of oil use. So the use of oil is not going to go down. So this is just a mirage. And the other thing is, and we'll talk about this also in greater detail, the way we move forward at the moment, where public money is going, we underinvest in the fossil fuel sector. So you said previously, be careful what you wish for. I say the same thing to Just Stop Oil, because the underinvestment will lead to a shortage of energy, I would say in 24, 25, 26. So we run that experiment too. We will see what a world is going to look like when there's a shortage of fossil fuels. And I'm not a dystopian fantasist, but this will not be a pretty picture. I can only, warn your viewers, stick to your ICs, get a generator in your basement, because these things will start to matter.
I mean, that's the thing. Our nuclear power stations are basically moving towards the end of their life. We're not building new ones yet, and it takes us decades to build anything like that. And we know solar and wind, sun doesn't shine, the wind doesn't blow, you need to have the backup, but we don't have enough backup. Although we've been told this winter, apparently, we're not looking at the likelihood of blackouts. I'm thinking, oh, how wonderful. In the first world country, a G7 nation, we're saying we probably won't have blackouts this winter. That's an extraordinary state of affairs for us to have got into, isn't it?
No, but there are two things to keep in mind. I think European policymakers confuse sound strategy with luck. We have been lucky with the weather. We haven't had a really cold winter in 2 years. So everybody is panicking.
Isn't that down to climate change?
Well, that's the thing. Ironically, one could argue that climate change is saving us from our stupid energy policies. Because if we get a really cold winter, this is going to be a bigger problem. Yep. And the second thing is, everybody tells about replacing existing energy sources with renewables. But at the same time, they say they want to electrify everything. EVs, heat pumps, right? The industry should run on electricity, which means you don't just need to replace the existing sources. You need to add on, because you will have additional demand. And you cannot do this with solar that works in Britain 9.7% of the time. You can only do it with nuclear, with natural gas, or potentially, which I would not recommend, or coal. These are just the laws of physics will not be denied. And in the battle between platitudes and physics remains undefeated.
And this is the thing, when we're talking about this sort of, the Greta Thunbergs and others and our Just Stop Oil activists saying, oh, we need to move away from this. They're not dealing with the actual facts. A lot of politicians aren't. But it's interesting. Rishi Sunak bumping the polls here in the UK when he said he was going to delay some of the targets, the rules about, by 2030. Now it's moved to 2035, when we would no longer be able to buy a brand new car that was petrol, diesel or hybrid. He's had to put that back, maybe because no one wants to buy one of these things. We haven't got the infrastructure or the electricity supply to actually run these things. But and heat pump rules on your house and energy efficiency rules for renting out your home or selling your home, these things have all been put back or scrapped. However, we discovered today that a number of banks, some of the largest lenders here in the UK, the Nationwide Building Society, NatWest and others, they are sticking to pledges to make 50% of their mortgage customers' homes, it's called this basically environmental rating C or more by 2030. So that means basically, unless the home you're buying is going to fulfil these ratings and be pretty insulated or have a heat pump, you won't be able to get a mortgage to buy it. Now, we're talking about the spending of, in some cases, 10, 20, 30,000 pounds to carry out that work. What do you make of that?
No, and it's also a transmission of funds from the poor to the rich, right? If I happen to have a house in the countryside that is nicely located, I can put solar panels that were made in China, of course, on my roof, and the government supports it. But the city dweller in London who lives in a basement apartment basically has to subsidize my luxury. And I can, of course, also with my Tesla drive into the ULEZ zone, but he or she have to support me with their taxes. But there is something else that's more insidious that I think is so important for all Europeans and also the British people to understand. A lot of these things, we talked about this last time, are produced in China. Now, what this means, and I have no problem with the Chinese, but what this means is this will continue to deindustrialize Great Britain. But what happens after deindustrialization is the demoralization of a society. We see this in the United States, the Rust Belt, whether it's alcohol abuse, drug death, death of despair, and this will come, and partially does already. This will come to Britain, this will come to Europe. We do no longer understand. Our societies no longer produce. We have outsourced everything from energy to production to China, to Russia, to others. And we have, in doing so, psychologically, morally demoralized our societies. And that is the big challenge. And I don't think that Keir Starmer, I don't think that Rishi Sunak understand this. Their challenge is much bigger than they think.
And again, the thing that really terrifies me is how many politicians make decisions on these things. They don't understand it. They don't know the most basic facts when I ask them. And they're just, this is pie in the sky stuff. The people have been lied to. Politicians, I think, lying to themselves on some occasions, and we're all going along with this hysteria that we're all going to die because the Earth's going to get a tiny bit warmer, when actually human beings have thrived many times over the millennia in warmer climes, and this is just hysteria, and it's not based on facts. And if it is a problem, we need to deal with it, and you know, people getting a heat pump ain't gonna deal with that problem. So people need to get with the programme. Ralph Schoellhammer, such a pleasure to talk to you. Great to have someone who actually knows what they're talking about on this issue on the show. Thank you so much. He is, of course, an economist at Webster University in Vienna. Thank you so much to him.